All right, good morning. Okay, so we are in 1 Thessalonians, lesson 6. We are doing the first half of chapter 5 for discussion, but I unfortunately feel like we really do need to do the full outline of the chapter just so you have how the chapter flows. So we are going to do that much of it. That'll get you a step ahead a little bit maybe for next week, but these are amazing teachings that we're getting out of 1 Thessalonians. Tell me your impressions of what you have been learning thus far. Tell me, are there things that you have been surprised about in this particular book? Are there things that have maybe even supported and reinforced the things that we all just came out of doing the Revelations, so a lot of this really supports a lot of that. And is there anything that you see better or more clearly, or just have thoughts concerning what we're looking at this week? Questions?
Last week, she said, go through and pick up the verses on love. And I was amazed. She gave us about this much space.
Yeah, you needed. Now, see, you are becoming a Precept student, Carol. I am so proud. I want to see your list because I can remember when you used to look at those little spots and go, well, okay, I'm done. Now you've got pages. That's a true preceptor there. You've done well. That's exciting. Yes. And so one of the things I was going to just kind of start us off with is talking about the possible ways of handling a book like 1 Thessalonians. We approached it as we do with any inductive study through the method of inductive Bible study. We take it down to its smallest pieces. We do that big overview and then go back in and begin to dig it out. We are literally looking at things pretty much paragraph by paragraph and chapter by chapter, right? So it's systematic and it's cutting it up into bite-sized pieces. But that is the way inductive Bible study handles this. But this is kind of a unique book, and there is another way of doing it, and I just wrote myself some notes on this. This would be another approach for this book. So after you finish doing what we've done, now you've got everything figured out, you've developed your at-a-glance chart, you know what your author's true purpose is, which is what? What is his goal for these people? That's right, that they would be blameless at his coming. In other words, he's understanding that these are people who have made a verbal confession of Jesus Christ as the coming Christ, the Lord. They are understanding that he is coming again, and he has taught them obviously about Jesus' coming for them, and then also Jesus' second coming at the day of the Lord. And he's made some apparent teachings to them on that. Now he's making references back to those in this letter. And then he further develops those. So you've laid all that out. You've kind of got all that in your mind. Now, one of the other ways that you could handle this book, which would be different and would be beneficial depending on who you are and what your ministry is. If you're into discipleship, and many of you are, if you're into evangelism, these are other things that you could do with this book. So let me just read my notes here. First, this letter is rich in a variety of repeated themes, right? Like what Carol just brought up, love, right? It's one of the themes that's undergirding the whole thing, and I could spend a whole day just talking about how we see the love and how it's demonstrated and the positives and even the harshness occasionally that real love has to implement when it goes into exhortation or even correction potentially, right? It suggests that, in other words, you could take 1 Thessalonians and study it through a theme message, right? Rather than verse by verse, okay? And that could be very helpful if you just picked out what are the major subjects that you see, the themes, the big pictures, and go through and just do a study with someone on the theme that you're interested in. Evangelism or whatever, okay? A special exploration of relationships in ministry and how to approach evangelism and discipleship would be one of those. Another one is the major purpose of Paul's letters, how they can be found without blame at his coming. So the subject of the coming of the Lord is a backdrop of all of it. We know that. he had briefly instructed them previously, but he had not fully developed it. And that's what we're looking at last week and again this week, right? That he seems to be diving a little bit deeper in that and adding more insights. But a study of eschatology would be very, very helpful. So you could take this book, lay out, which we did this week and last week, what we know about the day of the Lord and the coming of the Lord. We're going to distinguish those two very clearly today on the board, make sure we get that. We're going to split the hairs on it all. But then you could take this book and then springboard into a book on eschatology on the whole, okay? Which is why I did a timeline on the board for us today, because we're going to talk about some of the things that we're looking at here and where potentially do they go on a timeline.
Can I just interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
So one of the things that was like a light bulb for me was, he talks about the coming of the Lord in each chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I did just a brief scan of all Paul's writings. And the coming of the Lord is a theme, his theme almost in all of his writings. Light bulb, the motivation for obeying God is he's coming.
Yeah.
We are going to see him again. And it's not just this book.
Right. No, it's all of them.
All over.
And that's why you can actually cross-reference this book into all of his epistles, and almost all of them have a support message. Ephesians does, Philippians does. I mean, they all do. So, yeah, very good. That's exactly my point here. So you did good. Thank you. So, in other words, this letter is also a schooling, so to speak, on how to give the full gospel. I know that there are several of you in here who are very strong in evangelism, and I love that you are evangelists. And this book, I think, is a really good demonstration of when you are giving the gospel, it needs to be the full message, not just that Jesus saves you. He does. But there is an understanding that has to be expressed to the person who knows nothing and that you're trying to win about the seriousness of relationship with God, the responsibility on your part, also the warning for failure in that, the understanding that God is going to also reward us for the works of faith that we looked at here in this book. Your love for your fellow man and your brethren, as well as love for God, are equally important in the life that we're living here and now. So all that is another way of looking at this book, and you could take this book, go back and just say, let's look at it from the perspective of evangelism and discipleship, and let's break it down and look at these two qualities and go through the whole book and pull out analytical insights about how Paul demonstrates it and what he tells them to do. It would be a really good way of handling this book. So I just wanted to bring that up to you because this has been a unique book in that regard. And often some of these secondary subjects like love, which Carol brought up, or discipleship or evangelism, or like you said, the end times, which seems to be everywhere in all of Paul's writings, and it is. These are additional things that could be just kind of focused on and then dove into a little bit more deeply and then use them for training, okay? So I just thought I would mention that. All right. Okay, this week we did our basic chapter observations, so let's start there. Let's look at what we saw in chapter 5. Always, the very first thing Kay has us do is mark our keywords, make lists on those, determine a major theme of the chapter, right? And how does your chapter title support your book theme, right? We want to make sure we always do that. So the book theme, let's put it up here. And you can call that book title if that makes better sense to you, but the book theme is what? Repeat for me what we said a minute ago. What does Paul want for them? That's right. Be without blame at his coming. Okay, so that's our book theme. That helps us a lot. Now we're going to get a chapter theme. And how do you go about figuring out what your chapter theme is? How do you just jump in and title your chapter? No. How do you determine what you see the chapter theme is?
Observation worksheet on that one.
And doing, there you go.
Seeing what about the book theme is also in here.
Okay,
They have
good.
to tie together.
So you have to start by marking your keywords, right, and making lists on those. So let's start by just listing what we learned about our keywords. So what are the keywords for this chapter? Yes, Day of the Lord. Okay. And along with the day of the Lord, there's an allusion to the other day. What is that day? That the coming of the Lord, because it talks about a day when we will do what? What will happen to us? In verse 10, I'll direct you. We will live together with him. Now, is our living together with him in the day of the Lord? At the time that you're making your initial keyword list, you would not necessarily discern that that's different from the day of the Lord, but that still, eventually, once you made your list, you would, right? And that's why Kay says, first mark your keywords, then go and make a list on it. Because once you started making a list on the day of the Lord, you would discern through this chapter, are there two distinct events going on or that are being contrasted, right? Okay, so there's this day of the Lord, and there's this day when the day we will be with him. We will live together. Live together with him. I put the first part in parentheses. It's not stated that way in the text. This is what the scripture says. All right, so when we will live together with him. So what are the other keywords that support this conversation about these two events? Okay, light and darkness come in very big. Light, darkness,
Day and night, which is the same.
day, night. So what we're actually doing is making a list here of contrasts, right? Okay.
Awake or asleep?
Awake. Now, that one I'm going to put separate because there's a little trick thing on here. Awake and asleep or asleep. Mm-hmm. Wrath, yes, wrath, exactly. And there's a synonym to it also. Destruction. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to do it this way, awake or asleep. I want to redo this just because I don't want it to get too confusing. Awake or asleep, and then there's the word sleep. Did you determine in your work that being awake or asleep, but then you go down to see the other word sleep, were they the same connotation? Did they have the same meaning? No, they were totally different, weren't they? Okay.
Same word, though.
Same word, but it means something different. One is metaphorical. The other one is also metaphorical, but on a different subject, right?
Those who died in faith and those who are on this earth asleep.
Asleep spiritually, right? There's an apathy about the way that they are considering their eternal salvation. Okay.
I was confused about that because they have the same number.
Yep, they sure do. They do. And so now this poses a great question, and this is a challenge for all inductive students. What happens when you have a word that can mean two different things? They have the same Greek word base, and so you're looking at the same word in the Greek study dictionary. How do you determine which one it is? Context. Again, we're back to context, then rules for your interpretation. You have to read the sentence within its environment and see what is the subject matter and what has been the contrast. And in the case of this particular subject, how far back can you actually even go? When did we first talk about this subject of being awake or asleep? In chapter 4. So you could actually even have gone back and incorporated information that we pulled from chapter 4 forward to help build your understanding of that term, awake or asleep, and those who sleep. Okay, now, we also had a couple of very interesting phrases that came up here. Did any of you in your word studies come across that word idiom, Hebrew idioms? They're phrases or catchphrases, so to speak. Okay, there are a couple of idioms in here. I just want to bring your attention to them. They can still fall under key words, but they are idioms. I should have looked that word up. An idiom, it's a phrase or a well-known phrase. It's something that people that.
Different meaning, like you're the apple of your father's eye.
Yes.
Not literally an apple in your dad's eye.
Right.
But
Right.
what that means.
Right. So in this case, we did that, no one knows the day nor the hour when we did our Revelation study, right? And we came to find out that was a Hebrew idiom. It was drawn out of the Feast of Booths or one of those. It was the first one of the fall feast, whichever that one is. Yeah. So, and in that feast, that was the only feast of all the feasts that actually falls on the very first day of the new month. And because the months are determined by a full moon, they had to wait for that moon. So that's where that phrase, you don't know the day or the hour. So they would stand and watch until they saw the moon make its full appearance, and then they would say, it's the first day. And that's why they had to watch and wait. And therefore, you don't know the day or the hour of that particular feast until it happens and until the priest declared it. So that's how that phrase came about into being. So we have idioms like that all over in Scripture. As a matter of fact, I actually went and Googled and purchased a book. Now, some are good and some are bad, and I don't know which are which yet. So don't ask me that part. But I do know you can go in and Google on Amazon, and ask Hebrew idioms, books on Hebrew idioms. And I purchased one. I didn't like it. I purchased a second one. I think it's better. I'm still looking for one that's really well developed. But the great thing about it is though, it alerts you to where the idioms are in Scripture, where otherwise we would not necessarily know them unless we looked them up. How many of you in here looked up the word times and epochs? Good. You should have seen the word idiom in your definition, didn't you? Did it not tell you that it was a Hebrew idiom or just an idiom? Go ahead.
What book is that you're liking right now for your idioms?
This one is Times and Epochs is one, the first one.
No, she wanted the book.
Oh, the book, I don't know. I'm telling you, I don't know, and I don't want to recommend one yet because I haven't found one that I'm super happy with yet. I just haven't gone back and invested in buying another one yet. I bought two so far. The first one, I think I threw it. It just was really bad. I probably should have hung on to it so I don't buy it again. Kind of like what you were talking about the other day. But yeah, when I figure it out, I will let you know. I don't want to recommend a book until I'm really sure I like it, that I feel like it's well developed. Some of the, really you have to understand that all teachers, every teacher has a presupposition, including me. We teach from our view or our perspective. The great thing is I've been trained through Precept, so they have taught me to be as objective as I possibly can. All of us have to learn that, and then we all, for ourselves, have to determine where we land or stand on things. This is why, Kay and I sometimes even differ on our understandings of certain things. That I don't immediately just assume everything that Kay has in her workbook is 100% correct either. But the cool thing is because you're doing the method, along the way you should come to say, oh, I have a question about that. I'm not so sure I agree with that, right? And if you're not doing that, then I'm not doing my job to teach you guys to be alert and discerning. I want you to be discerning, and I want you to use your own brain. And I love that Kay and her curriculum has taught me to do that, because I have to give account one day for the way I've taught. But these books are written from someone's perspective, so you always have to keep that in mind as well. But anyway, but idioms are simply idioms. They either are or they aren't, and that's good, okay? So this first one is the times and epochs. Now, you can look up each word and get a definition, but guess what happens when you look up this word here, and then you look up this word here? Yeah, this word is a synonym to this word. They're actually linked together. So once you look up one, you've really got the definition for both, which I thought was kind of cool. And then the other idiom in here is and so I'm going to put that in quotes there. This one is called sons of light. And guess what the other one is? Sons of day. Yeah. Basically, they mean the same thing, and they are idioms, and they're making a reference through imagery as to what the point is that they're making. And so we'll look at those when we get to them with our definitions. Okay, so there's that. Now, there's all these contrasts. Now, what is the purpose for doing contrasts? What does a contrast help you do? When you've finished your basic observations, you've marked all your key words, and now she'll say, now you're supposed to look, according to your how-to study book, remember, that's your foundational book, your resource book on how to do this method. In their outline, they will say the next thing you do is do contrasts and comparisons. Why do you think that is? What do you think a contrast does for us? Yeah, you usually see do's and don'ts. So they give you exactly what they're saying, a contrast between one thing and the other thing, right? Okay.
In this case, it's a distinction between those, them, and you.
Yeah, so we looked at, let's mark a few of these down here, contrasts. Now, the good thing is Kay did tell us to do that, yeah? You, we and us were contrasted. You or they or them and us. And who was the us, by the way? Brethren, right? If you take it from the immediate text, it's the brethren. Give me a verse on the brethren. I think it's in verse 1. Is that right? Well, hold on. Yeah, it is, verse 1. Right after times and Exodus, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know full well these things. While they are saying this, but you, brethren, verse 4. So you can say verse 1 or verse 4, but you, brethren, okay? We and us and brethren. And then there's they or them on the other side, right? They and them. Okay, I'm going to put that as verse 3, just to pick one out of the thin air, right? Okay, what else do you see as a contrast here?
Wrath versus salvation.
There you go. That's an excellent one in this particular chapter, is it not? What does it help you do once you find that contrast? What have you discovered by the fact that you see there is wrath versus there is salvation for the we's and the they's and the us's and the... Yeah, all of a sudden, what happens then concerning this subject that we have, the day of the Lord? What does that tell us? That's right. It's not for everyone. There's the they's on the day of the Lord, and then there's the us's, who are the sons of light, the sons of day. We are affixed to the word salvation and to the fact that we will live with him together, right? So all of a sudden, by doing your contrast, what you have been able to do is recognize that there's a distinction here. You can't just read that day of the Lord and lump everything together in here in one time frame or under one subject matter. It is actually addressing two contrasting subjects, okay, and two contrasting outcomes, right? Everybody on board with me? So that's the purpose of doing contrast and comparisons. Some books are very heavy. I remember doing 1 John. It's very heavy in contrast because it's teaching about the Gnostics and what Gnosticism teaches, which is the lie, versus what Christianity and the gospel of Jesus Christ teaches, and that is what is true. And there's this constant back and forth through the whole. You could literally have pages of contrast in that particular book. But by doing contrast, you develop an awareness that there are two opposing things that are being discussed here. Okay, so that's the reason for doing them. Sometimes you do them and either you think, well, that's obvious, but then other times you do it and you go, oh, I didn't notice that. I see that more clearly now. Especially if you are someone who has not done a lot of study in eschatology. We have done the Revelation course, but some of you here have not. And some of you who are watching through video have not. And if you've not, then this day's lesson is going to be very, very valuable to you to make that clarification that there are two distinctive days that are being addressed here. Okay? Okay, so that covers your observations on the basics. That gets you started. Now from there you begin to say, okay, we're looking at day and light and darkness, awake, asleep, the wrath, the destruction. We're looking at this day of the Lord. We're looking at times and epochs. But then beyond that, which we were not necessarily told to do a whole lot, but after you leave verse 11, you kind of enter into a whole nother arena, don't you? Isn't it almost like it's a new subject matter to you? So tell me, what are some key words in there or words that you'd at least want to do word studies on? What are some things in there? What does it express to you in verses 12 to 22? A lot of do's, and a couple of don'ts, right? So yes, again, this one another and the brethren, and this in essence, if you had to kind of accumulate it down to just one statement, what is this about as far as the subject of salvation is concerned? Again, back to sanctification. Now see, because we just came out of chapter 4 and spent so much time looking at that subject, now you really can see the connection between chapter 4 and 5. I almost think they should have kept 4 and 5 as one chapter. And had they done that, you would have seen the flow. You wouldn't have isolated the subject of sanctification from this chapter. You would have seen how sanctification gets picked back up in verse 12 to 22. And you would have seen sandwiched in the middle of sanctification in 4 and sanctification at the end of 5. And in the middle was the subject of what two subjects? The day of the Lord and the coming of the Lord, which was expressed to us back in chapter 4. So when we go up here to that we are going to live together with him, you could also call that the coming of the Lord, and just put chapter 4 and just kind of put it in parentheses. No, it didn't come out of chapter 5, but I think this was a bad break. I think they should have kept it one chapter. It makes so much better sense when you do that. So now that you see that in verses 12 to 22, it's talking about sanctification, is there anything in here that kind of draws it all together to say, in a general statement, without saying, do this, do this, do this, don't do that, without doing that, is there kind of a statement in here in verses 12 to 22 that says what he wants these brethren to do on the whole?
Always seek after that which is good.
Very good. You nailed it. First time, Cynthia. Yes. It was bound to happen. I love it. No, I tell you what, though. No, I think that is exactly right. And it took me a while to decide that was what I was seeing when I looked at it. Basically, verses 12 to 22 are all back to Christ-likeness, what he wants our character and conduct to be like, what he wants us to avoid. And again, what is his reason for it follows, right? Do you see in verse 23? What does he follow and follow up on? Again, to be blameless at the coming of the Lord. This is why he wants you to be sanctified, and these are the things he wants you to do it. And in this one, we know our major book theme is be without blame at his coming, right? So we know that's what he's saying here in 23 and 24, correct? But we want a fresh way of stating it in our outline, because when you title your chapter, your paragraphs rather, you don't want to title it in the same name as your book theme. Okay, so you wouldn't want to title verses 23 and 24, be without blame at his coming. That would be a redundant statement. It's just a repeat on your chapter. So think of, concerning the coming of the Lord, in this case, what I think is really cool is all this conversation about sanctification, right? You need to do, don't, right? But what does he give us that's fresh in here? He will do it. He is the one who's faithful. Isn't that awesome? The way he says, look, don't stress over this is what I heard. That's what I heard. Don't stress over the fact that you have all these lists of do's and don'ts. God is going to do it in you. All you have to do is be cooperative with him, be alert and sober-minded, understand that he's coming again. Isn't that cool? So he follows it. Okay, so now we're ready to go over here and do our chapter theme. Now that we know chapter 5 is not just about the day of the Lord, that's actually sandwiched in between two sanctification exhortations on each side of it. So what you have to do is handle your titling of this chapter from a bigger perspective. And I think that we kind of got cheated a little bit by not taking the whole thing at one time. But tell me, how would you, now that you've thought this through a little bit with me badgering you, what would you say is his major emphasis here in this chapter? Be sons of the day, okay.
The God of peace himself will sanctify you entirely.
Okay, I love that one. The God of peace will sanctify you entirely, okay. Okay, so you're going to... It's spiritual instruction. It's exactly what it is. He is instructing them how to be Christ-like. He's saying it's through sanctification that you will be found without blame at his coming. And concerning all these instructions, and there was a bunch of them, you could pick any one of them out. On the whole, I would say what Cynthia kind of took us back to, though, kind of hugs the whole thing. It kind of says, yeah, all those things. Yeah, do all of that. So what do you think God is really wanting from us? To seek after the good of all people, right? To seek after good for one another and for all men. So let's start there. Seek after good. For I just put all people. I skipped the stuff in between. For one another and for all people is how it's phrased in the scripture, but I just kind of shortened it. And tell me what your title was again?
The God of peace himself will sanctify you.
The God of peace himself will sanctify you. I'm going to put this under here. The God of peace himself will sanctify you. Now, I want you to look at this and tell me, of those two statements up there so far, which one is an instruction? Okay, so so do you see how I did what I just did for you? I hopefully showed you that what you're looking for in these titles, because he's instructing them how to be without blame at his coming. And every one of our titles of all of our chapters has been do this, do this, do this. So like, if you go all the way back to last chapter in 4, walk to please God, abstain from sexual immorality, excel in love for one another, right? Do not be uninformed. We will be caught up. And now you're moving into this chapter. Now he says in verses 1 through 11, let's title that paragraph. So 1 through 11, did you notice how she's got a bold mark on there? You could break it down if you wanted to even further than that, but I think for our purposes, we're going to keep it as it is. Tell me, what is the instruction in there on the whole? What are some of the, go back and look at some of your contrasts maybe even, or things that you see that are contrasting points. Okay, be alert and sober. And how would you be alert and sober? No, you already have. You already have put that on. So he's not addressing how you're getting saved. He says you're already saved. You have done this, so now what? Now do what? Don't sleep as others do, and be alert and sober. Either of those two, what Kristen said, or the first part of that sentence. They both come out of the same sentence, though. That's what's interesting. So, verse 6, so then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. Now, it depends upon what you want to capture from the totality of verses 1 to 11. Verses 1 to 11 on the whole is a contrast about what?
Day and night.
2 different days, 2 different events, the consequences of wrath versus salvation, destruction versus being with him forever, right? And so in that, then you'd have to look at the fact, so let us be alert and sober. Would it cover that? Yes, if you understand what alert and sober is speaking about, correct? And the other side of this, then let us not sleep as others do. You'd have to know, what does it mean by sleep? Either of those would work as a title. They still accomplish the same thing. They make you alert to the fact that there's an others and an us. And the other one is more declarative in its instruction. So let's just put both of those titles up here. Let us be alert and sober. That's in verse 6. Or let us not sleep as others do.
What I'm confused about is the sleep there, asleep, was unbelievers. So
Sleep and asleep are 2 different meanings,
okay.
which is why Kay had you make those word studies and go back and evaluate the whole thing. So we'll talk about that, and we'll parse that one out for you here in a second. Okay, so what I had done was I had titled it, Let Us Not Sleep as Others Do, and then I put subpoints, but we can do it in reverse. It works the same way. Let us be alert and sober, and then one of your subpoints is let us not sleep as others do. But now the contrast to that is, what does he want us to do in there? In verse 11, we says, so do what? Encourage one another, right? Can you see how this really takes a whole lot of processing? You have to keep telling yourself, go back to the major theme. Now go back to the chapter on the whole. Now what are the exhortations that he's wanting them to do? Because this is a book about them being sanctified and found blameless at his coming. So in being found blameless, how are you going to do that? You're going to be alert and sober. You're not going to sleep, and you're going to encourage one another and build one another up is the other half of that, if you want to keep going, right? In verse 11. All right, are you following the titling process? Good. Okay, so that is all we were supposed to cover this morning, but I really do want to go ahead and title those other chapters, or paragraphs rather, for you so that we have the flow of thought here. Okay, what do you see in 12 to 22? Lots of exhortations again, right? Cynthia, what's the title for this? Yeah, so I'm going to retain the let us statement, and I'm going to begin it there. Let us seek after that which is good. For all people. That was a long one for that.
Can you tie with that, even though your chapter theme is basically the same thing?
Yes, but yeah, that is a problem, isn't it? How else can you do that? How else can we title that? What is another way?
Just do it backward. Let us repay
Well, we actually have the God, He will sanctify you, but I don't think that's really a command.
And that's in 23 anyway.
What is in 23?
That's in 23.
Oh, yeah, that we don't want to go into 23 yet. We want to stay in 22. This is God's will for you as an exhortation.
I titled this paragraph, verse 21, hold fast to which is good, because all of the things that he lists in.
There you go. That'll do it. Thank you. You rescued us. I like that. Hold fast to that which, yes. So that one is general. You're right. That's good. I didn't even catch that I had done that. That just tells you how asleep I was. Okay, hold fast to that which is good. And that was 21, verse 21. Oh, I like that. That's a good one. Okay, hold fast to that which is good, which would encompass all those exhortations. Is it good to appreciate the brethren? Is it good that you esteem them very highly and live in peace? Is it good for you to admonish the unruly and exhort the faint-hearted and to be patient with everyone? I mean, so all those things are covered under this idea of holding fast to that which is good. I like that. Very good. I got to go home and fix my chart so I do it right the next time. Okay. And underneath here, some subpoints on that. What does he tell us about that in verse 18? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I ended up putting in a statement of my own that's not actually in the text. It covers 12 to 22 and basically has become more Christ-like. I mean, that is the essence. That would be an analytical conclusion to what he's actually pointing them to is Christ-like character and conduct, right? Okay, and then the last section there is 23 and 24 becomes its own paragraph, 23 and 24, and it takes us back again to the theme of his goal for them, which is to be found without blame at his coming. But what was the new insight that we see here? Up here, hold fast to what's good because it's God's will for you. Now what?
Faithful is he who calls you, he will also bring it to pass.
There you go. And interesting, he calls you to what? In the context of what he's saying here, yes, he's called you to live a sanctified life in Christ Jesus, in that relationship with God. He's called you into this. He's not just called you into salvation. He's not just called you into an eternal life, but he's called you into a life that's sanctified, that you live it in a way that is pleasing and exhorts God, that it glorifies God, right? So faithful is God who calls you. He will bring it to pass. Very good. Okay, so that's in verse 24. Now, he closes it, and we're not going to go into a whole lot on this, but it's pretty simple. 25 then to 28. He does this closing, but he also has a request in there. Read the letter to others and pray for him. I thought that was interesting that here he is, you know, it almost takes you back to the beginning of the book, where he lays out the fact that he came to them amid much opposition. And they received the word amid much opposition. And then you go back to the book of Acts and read how he came into being at this particular location. Was he had been beaten and chased out of town from the previous place, right? So it's very interesting. So he does request prayer. And then he simply gives it a normal closing, right? Greet them, read this to others. And by the way, just in case you didn't note it on your observation worksheet, do you see in verse 27, I adjure you by the Lord to have this letter read? What is your literary style for this book? If you hadn't determined what kind of literary work you're in, what does this tell you? It's a letter. I just thought that was cute. So I do have marked on my observation worksheet. Okay. All right. So that gives us the flow of thought. And we're ready then to get into kind of the meat of what we worked on this week in homework. We looked at what this phrase called the times and epics of God, right? So we're going to define this times and epics first. Does somebody have those word definitions handy?
Yes.
Oh, good. Tell me what you see.
I did have them. The times are individual moments on a
Okay.
continuum.
Okay, so moments.
And I had them being an uncertain time.
Succession of moments in the physical world.
Could be uncertain or certain.
Yeah.
In other words, appointed, right? Appointed occasions, it was what mine said. Okay.
And, epics, seasons.
Seasons,
Opportunities.
opportunity.
I had that as some kind of fixed or special occasion.
Okay, that's why I put these together. It can be uncertain or it can be certain. Appointed occasions or events. Meaning determined times. Determined times. Okay, so up here, times and epics. Times was number 5550. Epics was 2540. And they are synonyms. Okay? Because when you look up epics, the way you can get to epics is in times. In my Greek study, it links me over to this other word, which is the times. So they are synonyms to one another. So if you look up one, you basically have your definition of the other. And so times, epics are synonyms. It's an occasion, a season, times, or determined times. Now, there's a great verse that helps, I think, actually give it a better definition in a way that you're going to love. Let's go to Acts 1:7. I don't remember if Kay had us go there or if I just found this. I don't remember. It might have been in one of my links. Somebody look up Acts 1:7.
He said to them, it is not for you to know times or epochs which the Father has fixed by his own authority.
Okay. Times or epochs fixed. So now that gives you a certain time that's appointed. Fixed by who?
Father.
The Father's own authority. Okay, so I thought that one was really, really helpful because when you read that in an actual sentence where he's talking about times and epochs, and he literally goes on to say it's a specific time, it's a fixed event, it's by the authority of God that is put in place, right? So in a way, to me, that word decreed, decreed times, right? So if you think of it from that perspective as another synonym, the idea that times and epochs can be decreed times by God, right? Where have we seen a decree recently in our study that actually relates to what we're studying here? Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 to 27. That's right. Good. So here's an example. Would be Daniel 9, 24 to 27. And what's so great about using that as a cross-reference right here, because now everything we're going to be looking at actually is in reference to what we see here. This was a decreed time, an event that's set, it's fixed, and it's fixed by the Father's own authority. It's a certain time, it's an appointed occasion, right? It's events, it's determined times. See how that all fit together so beautifully? That was a good mix, I thought. So God has, according to chapter 5, what? Is there anything in here that gives us another confirmation to this title here, or this definition?
Well, because he's basically saying you don't have anything need to be written to you about this.
Right.
Because
You already know.
You know it's coming like a thief.
Okay, there you go. So in other words, there is a time I've already told you about that I don't even need to write to you about. You know it's coming. Okay, that's excellent. Is there anything else in here that tells us that God's appointed this time? Drop into verse 9.
God has not destined us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation.
Okay, so this is in 1 Thessalonians 5:9. God has not destined. So there's another word, destined, right? This is decreed. Decreed would be another possible synonym. Has not destined us. And then the contrast is they are for wrath, but we are for salvation, right? I don't have room to write the whole thing on here without taking up my whole board. I want to have room for my chart below. So he has destined. What has he then therefore destined or determined or decreed? What is the times and the epochs that God is speaking about in this context? Is these two times, right? The coming of the Lord and the day of the Lord. One is a day for wrath. One is a day for salvation. I like that part. That's the good one. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. We are going to take this and divide this into a double chart, and hope I can write small enough that we can see all this. So it's the coming of the Lord. And here's the tricky thing. This subject of the coming of the Lord, they often say that about the day of the Lord. It's the coming of the Lord, because it is. It's just that they're two distinctive, different kinds of comings for two distinctive, different kinds of events, right? But the coming of the Lord in this book is one thing, and then there's the day of the Lord, and that's something else. Now, one of the things we're going to have to kind of parse out a little bit when we get into those cross references that you all did on page 66, where you looked at Isaiah and Joel and Obadiah. How many of you just got a little bit overwhelmed? Okay, for those of us who just did this homework, I want to show you my little trick on this and share you my tools. When we did Daniel and Revelation, I started a binder. Is that the right way? Yeah. These are all my prophecy observation worksheets that I did in Daniel and in Revelation, and I put them all into one folder, and I just labeled them. Joel, Peter, Zephaniah, Amos, Obadiah, Isaiah. I got them all in here. Jeremiah. So when she asked us to look at these, I pulled this out, and look what I've got these, and they're all even marked with all my keywords, and some of them I've got extensive notes to explain to myself what I'm looking at. See there how simple that made my homework? And I'm not rubbing this in your face. I'm really just, I know that I told you all. I know I told you all to do this when we were in our Revelation course together. I said, put together a book like this, a folder, put all your observation worksheets in one place, because then you have them handy. It's almost like your own little eschatology Bible, but it's your notes with the text, right? But if you didn't do it, I recommend you start it at any time you want. I mean, it's not too late. Like what we did this week, the ones that she asked us to look up, you could print those out and start a folder. And even if you don't have it all marked yet, you could begin to. The simple marking of the day of the Lord in there would have helped you get your answers for today's homework so much quicker. I'm going to have to kind of guide you through some of those because there was so much information. I mean, you can't write all those notes. What I did is I picked out the things I felt which were unique to each of the references she gave us, which kind of told the big story, the full story. Because what do we know about the day of the Lord as far as timelining it for our, if we do a timeline like this, where is the day of the Lord concerning these things we're calling the coming of the Lord and the day of the Lord in Thessalonians? Okay, so the day of the Lord starts right here and goes forward, right? The day of the Lord. Now, for those of you who did not do Revelation with us, I'm just going to tell you that you have to kind of trust us on this. We really had to work through this. We spent many weeks working on this. But there are also other opinions on this subject. So now what I want to do for you is try to define for you what the day of the Lord means as far as just a definition. Day of the Lord just to define it, it's any time in history when God reaches into history and intervenes in a way to accomplish his purposes. Can you think of any time in history when God reached down into history and worked things for a purpose? Exodus is a really good one, yeah. When Israel became a nation, and when it became a nation again, right? Yeah, and that second time too. So you're right, absolutely. Can you think of some things that would parallel? When you think about this time on the timeline for the day of the Lord, what is one of the adjectives that you would use? How would you describe it? Judgment. And the wrath of God. Okay. Think of a time when we've had in history, in the Bible, when we've had a time of judgment and wrath. Babylon was carried off, okay? Go back further. AD 70. Yeah, okay, that's another really good one. And is that a decreed time according to Daniel 9, 24 to 27? Yes, okay. So that would be another day of the Lord. Noah and the ark. That's the one that's the one that came to my mind. I'm going, or even in the garden, when God expelled them. So, well, yeah. Well, let's not forget the birth of Jesus. That's like an essential. Okay. And by the way, when you look back at other prophetic utterances, how often was Jesus' birth prophesied, right? And then God fulfilled it. So would you say that's a direct time in history when God reached in and he intervened to accomplish his purpose? Okay, so that's all I want you to understand about the phrase day of the Lord. And this is where it gets tricky, because when you're going through all these Old Testament passages that she had us go through, they mixed things together with judgments of places like Edom and Babylon. They also mixed together, sometimes it was judgments about Babylon, Medo-Persia, or any of those in ancient history, but then also inferring that there's going to be a final judgment that's going to come again at the end. So they get blended. And so this is why I want to kind of clarify this title or this subject name of the Day of the Lord. The Day of the Lord, there have been many days of the Lord throughout history. The Bible is filled with them. But there is also the Day of the Lord that he often makes reference to, and when it's described, and you look at its characteristics and qualities, it's speaking of that end time Day of the Lord. That is the Day of the Lord, or it's also called the time of the end, right? Or it's Daniel's 70th week, or it's referred to the wrath of God, right? So there's lots of ways that they describe it, but it means that specific Day of the Lord.
Why does it start with Daniel?
Oh, it doesn't start with Daniel. No.
The day of the Lord.
Oh, this is Daniel's 70th week, the tribulation. So this is the 7 years. So in this time in history is a specific time that God is speaking about to us here in what we're looking at. It's a time of wrath, a time of destruction, and it's going to happen at that time. But there have been many times that are called days of the Lord in Scripture. And that's where it gets confusing, because people then argue about where do you place the day of the Lord on the timeline. Well, okay, I'll just say it. Kay and I differed. She said the day of the Lord began mid-trib. I said, no, it begins at the beginning, because Daniel's 70th week makes that impossible to cut it in half. You have to bring it back to the full 7 years, right? So to me, that's where I placed that specific day of the Lord. I marked it at the beginning of the 7 years, and it encompasses all of that where God is intervening. It is God in the heavenly realm who is breaking the seals. It's Jesus himself breaking the seals. Is that God intervening? Oh, yeah. So I don't see how you can omit the first 3.5 years. I think it's the totality.
Not to mention that in that first 3.5, you had the two witnesses that are super special, supernatural.
Oh, no kidding. They are intervening, yes. You also have the 144,000 witnesses, right? You also have Antichrist has been presented on the scene through political powers. He's made a covenant with Israel, and Israel is the heart of everything that God is doing at this end time. And so that's why we did this. So that's how we define the day of the Lord for that specific day of the Lord. But there have been many days of the Lord. There's been the flood. There's been Babylon's captivity. I'm going to put days of the Lord. The flood, Babylon's captivity, Jesus' birth. Can you think of any others that we've mentioned already? The resurrection, right? I'll encompass birth and so forth. We'll cover the whole thing. The Exodus. AD 70. The fall of the temple. Okay, so those are just examples. Those are days of the Lord. But then there is this one right here that is the day of the Lord. And I'm going to leave myself some space here to write more things on that when we get to our cross references, okay? So here we're going to cover what we see in 1 Thessalonians, okay?
So this is a Thessalonian day of the Lord.
This right, well, no.
We're fixing to talk about that.
Well, that is what we're going to talk about right now. We're going to talk about in 1 Thessalonians, when he speaks about the day of the Lord, what are its qualities, its characteristics, what are the events that are going to be taking place, who does it affect, what's the outcome, those kinds of things. So let's do that right now. Let's start with going back to chapter 4 in your thinking and connect it is what I'm saying. I don't want us to list out of it. I just want you to understand. Don't divorce it from what came before in chapter 4. Starting in chapter 5 now, let's go through and let's say, what are the things that we see about this other day called the coming of the Lord? How is it described for us in here? What is the coming of the Lord about in chapter 5?
Are you talking about day of the Lord or coming of the Lord?
First, the coming of the Lord, the good one, the coming of the Lord. This is
The Lord is
He does descend from heaven. Okay. Let's put that up here. Coming of the Lord. I call that intervening in history. And what is that verse?
It's 4:16.
Oh, you're in chapter 4? Okay, I want you to stay in 5.
You said go back to 4.
Well, I said no, don't divorce it from 4 is what I said. I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't want you to divorce it from 4 because we are going to go back and actually list out of that well. So you said he descends from heaven. That's 4:16. I'll go ahead and put that on.
Come like a thief in the night,
Uh-huh.
unaware.
Okay, that is the day of the Lord.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep,
No,
that's okay.
right.
He comes.
Sorry.
He comes. I'm so good. I can move. I can put it in the right spot. I actually know this subject so well. I can put it in the right spot. He comes like that's a terrible marker. I got to get one that has color in it. He comes like a thief in the night. And what verse are you in? 5 what? 5:2. Okay. He comes like a thief in the night. Wow, what a difference. He descends from heaven. He comes like a thief in the night. Wouldn't you say that's a contrast right there? My list doesn't have it that way, but I like that. That is really quite profound. Okay. All right, what else do we know about this day of the Lord? Let's finish that out since you're over there. What is the outcome of it? What happens?
Destruction.
It's destruction. It is destruction. What happens to the people? What does it tell us about them in that verse? They will not escape. And I'm going to put they in that way. They will not escape. That's also in 5:3. Okay?
And they will say, they'll be saying peace.
Yeah, they will be saying. They will be saying, peace and safety. And that one's 3. Okay. Yeah, isn't that it? So there's another one. It's destruction, but they're going to be saying safety and peace, right? Again, another contrast. They think one thing, but the reality is going to be totally something else. What is that day for? The day of the Lord. Who are the people that this day of the Lord is for? Yeah, unbelievers. But how does it call them in this chapter? Those that are in darkness. Those in darkness. Verse 4. And what else are they called? In 5, similar. Of the night. We almost have to flip it, but that is what it means. Those of the night. Okay. Any other points that you picked out on the day of the Lord? He comes like a thief in the night. It is destruction. They will not escape it. They will be saying peace and safety. It is for those in darkness and those of the night. What's going to happen to them in verse 4? It's going to overtake them like. All right, so we'll overtake them. Verse 4. Verse 9 gives us a really big one about this day of the Lord. What is it? It's wrath. It is the wrath of who, by the way? The wrath of God. It is the wrath of God. In verse 9. Okay. Any other thoughts on that part of our observation out of chapter 4?
And that word wrath is really
Oh,
strong. It's orgy, like the word orgy.
yes. Oh, wow, that's cool. Yeah, it is. No, that's kind of gross.
It's just, ugly.
It is. And does it make you think of anything we have studied recently? This day of wrath, this day of destruction, a day of darkness and gloom. And I mean, does that remind you of any subject that we have studied recently? Maybe the 70th week of Daniel. Very good, Kristen. Okay, so now the cool thing about doing this contrast list like this is it becomes very apparent these are two distinct times. Let's flip back over now and look at these. This day when we are going to be living together with him. He descends from heaven. We got that out of chapter 4, but let's go back to chapter 5 first. What do we know about the day of his coming for us? What is that day for? How is it described in that verse 9? It's for salvation. It is a day of salvation. How did I put that? Day of salvation. Okay, so it's salvation, and that's in verse 9, 5:9. Who are we saved by? Saved through Jesus. Also verse 9. Come on, y'all. This is not hard. This is easy stuff. I want to hear what you have to think on this. Okay, it's for those awake or asleep. Now, we need to talk about that one a little bit more carefully. What verse was that one in? 10. Okay, because again, back to the discussion about the fact that that word sleep can be sleep as in actually sleeping. But in the context here, is that what it's talking about?
Those who have already died.
Okay, so in this case, since it's for those who are awake or asleep, and it's people who are going to receive salvation, it's salvation that comes through Jesus Christ. If it's those who are awake or asleep, how are they? They're awake or asleep, but who are they in? In Christ. In other words, they're Christians, right? They're awake or asleep in Christ. Yeah, whether they're dead or alive, but they are only believers. They are in Christ because we've already laid down the foundation that it is a day of salvation, but we're saved through Jesus. The only way that happens, he talks about that in verse 8. How do you get that salvation? What have you put on? Yeah. So I'm going to put on here, having put on, and then you have to list those things that you have put on. Somebody list them for me.
Breastplate of
Faith, love, and
the helmet of salvation.
salvation.
Hope of salvation.
Okay, hope of salvation. Okay, I guess I should put the whole thing. And then does it give you any more details? How did this occur for us? What has Jesus done for us that we are privileged to be a part of this?
First, him who died for us.
He died for us. And Jesus died for us. So that's who it's for. It's for those who are awake or asleep, meaning alive or dead, in Christ Jesus, having put on faith, love, and the hope of salvation, for whom Jesus died for them. I guess I got to still say us just to make it with the flow. Okay. And that's in verse 8. Okay. So whether we are awake or asleep, what's going to happen? We will live together with, I'm going to make the word instead of him, Jesus. That's in verse 10, right? Yeah. Okay. So, the coming of the Lord is salvation. We're saved through our Lord Jesus Christ in verse 9. Jesus died for us so that we will live together with him in 10. God himself will sanctify us entirely without blame at Jesus' coming. It's one of the points we didn't put on there, but you might want to add that to your list, because that's the day, this day of the Lord is the day when he will entirely sanctify you. We're going to talk, I think we'll talk about that one next week. And we will be preserved complete, according to verse 23. It's for those not destined for wrath. I could add that one on there as a contrast. Is for those not destined for wrath, but for salvation. Okay, and so that's in verse 9. Okay?
Which one of these is referring to end times?
Okay, good question. I love that question. Okay, so here's the trickiness to this question. I know, that's a good question. And this is exactly why I'm doing this, because although many of us have just come out of this study and we've exhausted it to the point that we're like, yeah, move on. There are many people who do not know the distinction, number one. The other problem with answering this question with just a direct answer, so I'm going to be a little bit more like Kay and give you the whole thing, is that there is argument as to when these specific events occur, okay? In this classroom, what did we determine is the time frame for the rapture of the church, which is what we're talking about right here, the coming of the Lord. This is called the rapture. Remember, remember in chapter 4, it was called what? The catching up. Right? So the rapture in chapter 4 is called the catching up. So this is why I was saying I really think chapter 4 and 5 should be one unit. It wouldn't hurt in your Bible even to mark a note to yourself, note to self. Chapter 4 and 5 should be one chapter. Because if you separate the two, you lose the continuity of your thought, and you also lose the connectiveness of the full message, where it's the opening of 4 is about sanctification, the close of 5 is about sanctification, and sandwiched in between are these two events: the coming of the Lord for the catching up, and the day of the Lord for this day of wrath and destruction. Obviously, if we go back now, and let's do it, let's go back and talk about what we learned on the whole. Now, she had asked you to do this, I think, one of the days. I can't remember which day. But go back and look at all the things that you have learned about the coming of the Lord at the close of each of these chapters. Remember how we've determined that the author's purpose is to prepare them so that they will be without blame at his coming. The way that we came to understand that was actually his goal, his purpose, was the fact that at the close of every chapter, he makes a reference to the fact that Jesus is coming, right? So what else do you learn about the Jesus is coming that seems to fit for us in this subject here of the coming of the Lord? So let's do that. Coming of the Lord. And this is in chapter.
He comes like a thief. That's going to be like the rapture too, you know.
Well,
unexpectedly.
I don't know. Do you think for us it's going to be unexpected?
Well, I think we're not going to be sure.
We're not going to know the day nor the hour. That is true. So therefore, what are we supposed to be doing? So what are we supposed to be doing as believers? Always doing what? Watching and waiting. Isn't that what he always says? So I would not call that a surprise. When it happens, I won't know when it's going to happen. That is true. But will it be like a thief in the night? When you think of the imagery of a thief in the night, what does a thief in the night generally do? And it's usually an assault, and you are attacked, so to speak. They come in, they steal everything, they scare you to death. Is that going to be like our unexpected visit of the Lord? No. So what we're doing is we're getting this contrast between the coming of the Lord, which, yes, we don't know the day nor the hour, but it's not going to catch us like a thief in the night. And this day specifically won't catch us like a thief in the night, because why? When it's talking about the day of the Lord, why will the day of the Lord not catch us like a thief in the night? And so apparently we're what? We're already gone. Apparently we're not going to be here for this day when this happens, because we're going to already be gone. He's coming to catch us up, to be with him forever. And for us, our catching up is a day of salvation. It's being saved. Now, what are we being saved from in chapter 4? Aha. Give me the reference. Saved from wrath. Chapter 4. What verse was that? I can't remember. We were caught up with him. Didn't it tell us that we were going to be saved from wrath? Am I wrong on that? Maybe it was a cross-reference? We're not destined for wrath. Okay. Thank you. Oh, that's where I knew. See, if we had gone back to do the other part first, thank you so much. Bless your heart. I don't know who did that, but thank you. Okay, who was that gave us that brilliant answer? Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. See, I do have you know what? It's the very first one on my list. He rescues us from the wrath to come in chapter 1, verse 10. So the day, this catching up in 1:10, we're saved from wrath, right? And it's the wrath to come. So it's letting us know the wrath to come, we're going to be saved from it. So what does that tell you about where we go out? When does this coming day of the Lord have to be if in chapter 1, verse 10, it says that we are saved from it? We have to be taken out before that day of the Lord occurs in order for us to be saved from it, right? Right. So for us, we put here the coming of the Lord right here, sometime before the tribulation. So we have the coming of the Lord here. We see the tribulation begins, that Daniel's 70th week, and that begins the day of the Lord. So here we have the contrast, the coming of the Lord and the day of the Lord. Are you following that? Did that help you answer your question?
Well, I'm very thrilled to read that.
Yeah. Listen, I'm highlighting that one. That chapter 1, you know what's really interesting is how the author opens the book with that statement. Right off the bat in chapter 1, what does that tell you about these believers? What might have been concerning them? One of the questions they had was about those who were awake and those who were asleep, right, in chapter 4. In other words, if you are in faith and you've already died, what happens to you when he comes for us, the coming of the Lord, the rapture, or the catching up, we're calling it, right? And he was answering that, but it also seems to me like right off the bat in chapter 1, verse 10, he says, he's the Lord who's going to rescue you from the wrath that's to come. So this is your hope. This is your joy, right? This is the thing that gives you peace and comfort. This is why you and I can walk every single day in this life with confidence. We are not going to go through the day of wrath. We are going to be rescued from the wrath. Now, I have heard of many, many teachings, and they say, well, you can be rescued but still go through it. And I'm like, I don't think so. That is not what 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians is laying out for us. They are making a very obvious contrast between these 2 days that they are distinctive. One of them is called the Day of the Lord, and we know what the days of the Lord have all been about. Jesus' birth was radical. It was a good thing, but all these others are days of destruction. They're days when God comes in and there's judgment that is executed, right? So, and I don't know that I've ever seen anywhere in the Word of God where it says that Jesus' birth is a day of the Lord, but by definition it really is, because God is still intervening in history and he's fulfilling his word. But on the whole, the 9/10 of these days of the Lord are destructive days, and they're days of judgment. So when you see this contrast being made in 1 Thessalonians, and then that very clear statement in 1:10 that says, you are kept from that wrath that's coming, it lets you know it's coming, it's ahead of us, we are back here somewhere. Now, how far back, we don't know. Do we know the day and the hour of our rapture, our catching up? No, we don't. But are we going to be yelling peace and safety while we're waiting for it? No. As a matter of fact, what are we actually saying? This world is falling apart. We see the world is getting darker. We see the hearts of men are growing cold. Right? So this is what is the reality that we are seeing, and the reality is actually lining up with what God has told us would happen. Matthew 24 even talks about it in that dialogue where Jesus is giving them about the days, when is your coming and what will be the signs of it, right? And in there he has a whole montage about what it's going to be like, how we're going to be, even get to a place where we're being arrested. How many of you have seen the news recently about this Christians being arrested for no reason whatsoever? I mean, it's crazy, and it's just because they happen to be conservative and on the right rather than on the left, and this is the enemy that's coming against us right now. We are really getting close to the end times. We are. I don't know about you, but I see us as right in here. Any day now can be this day that God comes for us. All of it. And honestly, if the rapture occurs, how fast do you think the rest of that's going to fall into place? What's not in place right now, when the church is gone, what is the church called in 2 Thessalonians? The restrainer. So the restraining work of the Holy Spirit through the church, when we are removed and all the goodness and all the light, the sons of light and the sons of the day are all gone, it's not going to take long for them to implement all the deeds of darkness that they want. Okay, so let's go back to making this list. The catching up, the coming of the Lord. In chapter 1, verse 10, we're saved from wrath that's to come. What else do you learn? Go into chapter 2 then, in verse 19. What do you learn there? What is this implying for us? What's going to happen for us at his coming? Yes, we're going to be in his presence. We will be in his presence. Okay, and also, and in his presence, what are we going to, he says, let me open 2. Hold on. Let me read it so that I don't mess it up. Who is our hope or joy or crown of exaltation? Is it not even you in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ at his coming? For you are our glory and joy. What is he alluding to there? What are we going to receive when we are raptured up and taken to heaven to be with the Lord? We get rewards. And this joy and crown of exaltation, this is speaking of the rewards that we will receive. So we will be in his presence, and there will be joy and exaltation for us. What a difference that is when you think of this. They're not going to escape. They're going to be saying peace and safety. It's not for those in dark. It is for those who are in darkness. They're of the night. It's going to overtake them. It is the wrath of God that's going to come down on their heads. But for us, we will be in his presence. We will be filled with joy and exultation. All of that is going to be given to us, and there'll be those rewards for us. You, basically, at his coming, we're going to receive crowns for the works of faith that we have done. We've studied about that phrase, the works of faith, in this book. Particularly in this case, he's saying it's for his having shared the gospel with them, right? You, whom I led into faith, you are my crown and you are my joy in his presence. So it's talking about that. And who comes with him in chapter 3? When Jesus comes, who comes with him? All his saints. So who is that talking about? Those who are asleep. The ones who are asleep, he says, whether we are, where is it at?
The fourth one down, the fourth dot.
1, 2, 3, 4. For those three, there we go. Awake or asleep. So whether you are dead or whether you are alive. So I'm going to say dead or alive, right? Dead or alive, you're going to be caught up to be with the Lord. You're going to receive your body. Now, what chapter does that take you back to then for expounding on your understanding of receiving your new body? When do you receive your new body? What is that called? Justification, sanctification, glorification. When do you get your glorification? At the rapture. And when does and at the rapture? Oh, what was my question now? I had to take through too many steps. Now my brain lost it. Okay. So those who are dead, those who are alive, they're dead in Christ Jesus. That was the thing that we put on here. They've put on faith and love and hope. Jesus died for them, right? So they are called the hagios. That word saints means hagios, holy ones, God's people. So in Revelation 18:20, if you go in and look at that in the reality of knowing that we're talking about these end times things, who are these saints? They're the saints, the apostles, the prophets. It's us. It's those who love the Lord. It's the church. In 1 Corinthians 1:2, if you want to make a note, it's the church of God at Corinth, the ones called to be God's people. That's who the saints are that are going to come with him. So if you're already died, if you and I die before all this happens, we're going to be in spirit with the Lord. But this day when the rapture occurs, we're going to get our new body. Therefore, he's going to bring us with him when he comes, right? So in this day, Jesus is coming, right? And he's going to bring all of our little spirits with him. And what's going to happen? Those who are dead, right? Now here's their tombstone, okay? They're going to rise, and those who are alive are going to be caught up, and we're going to be caught up to be with the Lord together. The spirits of these dead souls are going to be united. The people who are alive are going to receive their new body, their glorified body, and we will be with him forever. But what's going to happen then from this time to this time? If we're saved from the wrath, what does that mean we don't have to be present for? The wrath. The 7 years are not for us.
Katie, can I ask a question? Because I thought I knew. Now I'm confused. So the souls under the altar are not the people that are already gone. It's going to be the people that die during the tribulation.
It could be. It could be.
Because otherwise,
It's anybody who's exactly. Okay, so this is where you have the distinction of the rapture of the church versus later there's a resurrection in chapter 20 for all the others who are not called the church. That would be from Daniel. Remember what he said to Daniel? Daniel, go your way, and at the time of the end, you will rise again for your allotted portion. So when does Daniel get his resurrection? At the end of the age. Why? Is he the church? No. They get a resurrection, absolutely, and so it's all equal. Everybody gets a resurrection if you're in faith. But they get the Old Testament saints here, Old Testament saints, and Daniel, Daniel 12 talks about this. I can't remember the verse number, but in Daniel 12 it says, Daniel, go your way. And at the end, Old Testament is at end, meaning right here. This is when Jesus comes, and it's chapter 20 of Revelation explains it.
Okay, so then these are the souls that were in Sheol that Jesus went down to get.
Yes, and all the souls from Sheol are with the Lord.
Okay,
Yes,
because anybody who dies after Jesus was resurrected then
automatically go to be with the Lord. That's correct. Yeah, see, this is complicated, isn't it? There are lots of pieces to this, but look at how much you guys have learned already. And I cannot do this with people who have not been through all these pieces. The fact that we have been through all of these inductive studies on the process of all of this thing about Sheol, the bosom of Abraham, that you get out of Luke 16, I think it was, with Lazarus, who dies and goes to be with the bosom of Abraham, and then the rich man dies and he goes into the place of torment. Both are in the place called Sheol. But that's before the cross. But once the cross happens, after when Jesus resurrects, it says Ephesians 4:8 says, and he takes with him a host of captives and sets them free. So he takes all believers who are in the bosom of Abraham with him when he ascends. Now, tell me why they couldn't be in heaven before that. Because nobody can go without that shedding of blood. The propitiation of Jesus Christ had to happen first. And until he put that blood on the altar, which he did at his resurrection, remember he said to Mary, don't touch me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. He ascends to the Father on the day of his resurrection. He puts his blood upon that altar. That opens heaven for the souls of all believers to come in the presence of God the Father again. Without that, we can't go. So that had to happen first. So those are the souls, but not, yes, it does. So now what we have is, this is where people argue, but there are different dispensations for different people. We each have a group. We are the bride of Christ. We're distinct. And there is also the wife of God. Who is that? Israel. And then there are all those Old Testament saints as well. They're all believing from the days of Adam and Eve. What were they believing God for? A promised seed. So there's those believers are in one group. They are the wife of God. Then there's us, the church. We're his bride. When we come back with him, Revelation 19 says, the bride has made herself ready. Remember? Yes.
And that's another point for preacher of rapture, is because we can't come back with him
If we're not ready.
if we're not already with him.
That's right. Exactly. So we have to be with him in order to come back with him. And Revelation teaches us that. Yes.
So to be clear, the rapture is just for the church.
Yep.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, so when we're with the Lord, the spirits, the Old Testament saying, their soul is with the Lord.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Because now the blood was shed.
Right.
So anyone who died in faith from Adam and Eve on, their souls are with the Lord.
The marriage supper of the Lamb,
And there are wedding guests. Who do you think the guests are?
the Old Testament saying.
Yeah.
The Old Testament saints are with the Lord.
Their soul, their spirit.
They
They don't get resurrected until at the end over here.
so how can they be with the Lord if they're not resurrected until?
Because they were talking about physical body. Their soul is with the Lord because the cross has occurred. So Jesus set free everyone from the bosom of Abraham free. Everyone in faith who'd been in faith are now in the presence of the Lord. Okay? All right. They're all there. They're there in soul right now. Just like all the saints from the cross forward are still there with the Lord in.
They don't have their glorified body.
But we do not have a glorified body because that is a day of the Lord, and that occurs on a determined time in history that God has set and fixed in its order. And it occurs at a specific time. When does it tell us in Luke?
The rapture, we don't know that.
The rapture and glorified body. It's all the same thing. That all happens on a fixed day. Do you remember what Luke tells us?
So I shouldn't put that under the coming, I should put that under the day of the Lord?
No, but I'm saying it's another day of the Lord. Here, Jesus' birth is a day of the Lord. I'm going to put down here the catching up. It's another day of the Lord, but then there is the day of the Lord that encompasses this. That was what I'm trying to split the hairs on in your thinking, because there are many days of the Lord in Scripture. You just have to determine which day of the Lord he's talking about. Okay? Context will rule for your understanding of that. But if you come to realize there are many days of the Lord in the Bible, any of them, it just has to do with God fulfilling his word. He's made a prophetic utterance and he fulfills it. That's a day of the Lord. And the scripture mostly talks about the day of the Lord, speaking of Daniel's 70th week. But that isn't the only day of the Lord. The catching up is actually another day of the Lord, because God is intervening in history, and he has said it. In Luke, he says, and when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, then the end. That's an appointed time. It's a designated fixed time in history, which is what we just determined times and epochs is referring to. And when he speaks of it here, times and epochs is both of these. They're both determined. They're both times in history that are fixed. But the day of the Lord that is mostly talked about, that is called that day of wrath, the grapes of wrath are going to be tread. The winepress is being tread, right? That is speaking of that specific day of the Lord, which is Daniel's 70th week.
Katie wants to say something.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yes, Katie, am I on?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
So are most of the references in 1 Thessalonians to the coming of the Lord referring to the rapture, but the one in 3:13 when the Lord comes with all his saints is referring to his coming at the end?
Okay, what verse are you in? 3 what?
3:13.
No. He's going to establish our hearts without blame in holiness before our God and Father at the coming of our Lord with all his saints. That's speaking of the rapture. Okay?
It's a little confusing that it sounds like he's already with his saints.
We are with him in spirit. And now this day when he comes to establish us without blame and holiness, I think when we do our homework this week, we're going to get into this, how we're going to be fully prepared. He says, now may the God of peace himself sanctify you entirely, and may your spirit, soul, and body be preserved complete. That's what that's speaking of. It's going to be without blame at the coming of the Lord. That's the day of the rapture when we get our glorified body.
And you told me that was also the souls of the saints.
And that's the souls of the saints coming, yes, the souls of the saints who are in heaven come down. So those are the saints coming with him. And the dead body goes up. And then those who are living in faith go up. We'll all get a glorified body so that we will be like him. And then what happens is there's an interim of 7 years that God continues to work with God's wife. That is Israel and all the Old Testament saints. And at the end of that 7 years, the rest of the souls who have not yet received their body receive their bodies at that point. It's also referred, all you have to do is go back and read Revelation 20, verse 4.
And that's referred to as what?
It's called the first resurrection. And the first resurrection is a title that means any resurrection. It just means those who get to go to be with Jesus and have eternal life. The second resurrection is called the second death, and they are the ones who are resurrected and go into hell. I know. Oh, I don't like that one.
Yeah, I always say there's like 3 stages. Well, Jesus was the first fruits, and then there's the rapture.
Yep.
And then
Right.
there's your Old Testament and tribulation saints.
Right.
So there's like 3 stages to the first.
There is. And this is where everybody gets confused, and I understand that. But you just have to understand that God has, I don't want to call them dispensations. What will we call them? But we each have identities, right? The church has its own unique identity because we were blessed to be born in the church age, and we are the bride of Christ. We are unique in that. And so our resurrection comes first, and we have a wedding in the heavenly realm with Jesus. We will be wed to him. We will be given our rewards. We will be clothed in this fine linen, it says. When we come back in Revelation 19, it says, we are dressed in the fine linen, the righteous acts of the saints. That's what we're reading about here. You want a nice, big, beautiful garment to wear? The righteous acts of the saints are what you will be rewarded with through a garment that's called fine linen. And when we come back with Jesus to rule and reign with him, we come at the end of the 7 years of tribulation, and we enter into the kingdom of God with him. At that time, at the same time, when that day occurs, at the end of the 7 years, then all the Old Testament saints are resurrected according to Revelation 20, verse 4. They get their resurrected body in that moment, and then they get put onto thrones, and they get to rule and reign also, just as we do. That's where David comes in, and he gets assigned his place, and everyone gets allotted portions. Ezekiel, the last 4 or 5 chapters, 6 chapters maybe, of Ezekiel covers all of that. It's very detailed, but all that information is in the last part of Ezekiel for Israel.
We'll do that in the fall of 2023.
Okay, fall of 2023, we're doing Ezekiel. Okay, that's an advertisement. Okay, all right, so we didn't get all through this. Let me just wrap this up so that we're done. I think I got you far enough that now you can hopefully get some pieces in your head. You can go back. You need to finish your list on the coming of the Lord and what it is that distinguishes us from them, okay? Finish out your list here, going through chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. List all the things about this catching up, those who are going to be saved from the wrath, that we are going to be in his presence, okay? And then you're going to go back over to the day of the Lord subject, and that's where Kay took us on page 66. She took us to Isaiah, Joel, Obadiah, Zephaniah, Acts, and 2 Peter. That was a huge amount of, I know it was. But in essence, let me give you 2 statements. Isaiah 13 in verse 6, it will come as destruction from the Almighty. Okay? So it's a day of wrath, right? A day of destruction, just like we saw in Thessalonians. And he says in verse 13:24 of Isaiah, I have planned it, so it will stand. Would you call that a decreed, appointed time? Would you call that a time and an epoch? And he says to them in the opening of chapter 5, I don't need to talk to you about the times or the epochs. You know it full well. So he had already told them about it. He's just filling in more details now and giving us additional insight. Those times and epochs, brethren, I have no need of anything to be written to you. That's kind of scary for a person like me who's been in faith for a long, long, long time. And I'm thinking, yeah, I still need you to tell me about it. please go ahead. Don't let me stop you. Okay, so that is there, and then you go on in all those other passages, and they just give additional insights. But what you will see in there are references to the 70th day of Daniel, the 7-year tribulation. There are also references to the 1,000-year reign. And there are also references to the great white throne judgment all the way down here and the new heaven and the new earth. That means the day of the Lord begins at the beginning of the 7 years and goes all the way through. Okay? Because all of it is decreed by God, a time set. That's why we see things systematically. They come in a certain order. And you can point to them as a season or a time, which is what the definition is for times and epochs. Okay? I hope that was clear. Not clear as mud. I want it clear. But if you have questions, I'm so happy to stay behind and help you. Okay? All right, or ask me by email. Thank you guys. See you next week.